As we head into the 2026 State of the Nation address, I want to offer a clear and I think practical lens of what's at stake and what should come next. Because the world right now feels quite edgy, fragmented, volatile, and in that kind of environment, I think countries don't get rewarded for having plans, they get rewarded for executing the right priorities with speed and credibility. So, what I want to touch on is a few big ideas. Um, Global turmoil can either compound or constrain us, or it can push us into a new era of truly African-led opportunities. Now, firstly, let's start with the context. Across the global north, conflict and economic strain are reshaping trade, technology, and capital flows, and even alliances. Trade, finance, and technology are increasingly being used as strategic instruments, and smaller economies often feel the aftershock first. But of course, here's a counterpoint. Africa is not standing still. In fact, much of the continent is forecast to outpace the global growth in 2026. And that's not a reason for complacency. It's a reminder that relative momentum matters. So the story is not simply about risk. It's this relevant momentum, and the question then becomes: can South Africa position itself to capture that momentum? Now, we can't talk about the opportunity, of course, without acknowledging the pressure points, and one of those biggest pressure points is one of jobs. Youth unemployment remains as defined a defining constraint on growth, stability, and of course social cohesion. And it turns, if we look at 2026, into a genuine crossroads. We either drift or we deliberately build a job-driven growth engine that's credible at home, but of course competitive across the continent. So, where does the most immediate upside come from? One of the most powerful and underused levers is the inter-Africa trade through the inter-Africa continental free trade area. Now, this isn't just a trade area, but it's a platform for scale, for new markets, new supply chains, and new corridors for investment and growth. And it's not only about physical trade, but also digital and services that will shape who wins in the next phase of African growth. So it's more protectionist. In this more protectionist and fragmented world, regional integration becomes a true resilience strategy and ultimately a growth strategy. Now, with this context, what do we want to be listening for at SONA? What do we want government to say? And I would argue that there's three signals, not slogans, but signals we should be looking out for. Firstly, a delivery-led reform that lowers friction for investment. So cutting red tape that slows projects, slows permits, slows entrepreneurship. Investors can price risk, but they struggle to price uncertainty and administrative drag. The second is infrastructure that restores competitiveness. Energy security, yes, but also our ports, our rail, roads, digital infrastructure. Without logistics performance, we cannot be a serious trade hub for Africa. And of course, thirdly, I think a job agenda that's real, especially for youth, not only public employment, but large scale work, integrated learnings, apprenticeships, incentive for first time hires, and credible pathways from education to employability. I think also the test is quite simple. Do we hear a plan that is measurable? Do we see a mechanism um, that's or a mechanism for accountability? And then we have to also think about the private sector. Government can set the runway, but business has to obviously fly the plane. And I want to touch on briefly four themes that I think corporate South Africa should be looking at for 2026. I think firstly is to build inter-Africa partnerships now. Don't treat African expansion as a nice to have. Treat it as diversification, resilience, and growth. Focus on turning digital transformation into productivity. So deploy AI, automation, data into operations, consumer experience, risk systems, and supply chains. Make climate resilience a strategic issue. It's not a CSR footnote. Climate shocks are ultimately balance sheet events through disruption in insurance, infrastructure, and agricultural volatility. And lastly, to reinforce supply chain resilience and regional sourcing. In a fragmented world, overdependence is a risk. So regional supply networks can become a key strategic advantage. So SONA should not only diagnose the moment or articulate the moment, but it should mobilize it. I think in South Africa that becomes um, a real linchpin of Africa trade, a South Africa that stabilizes in energy and competes on reliability. South Africa, where young people don't just wait for jobs, but they build companies that scale across the continent. Um, the future is truly not a fantasy; it's plausible, but it depends on on key choices, on execution, and on alignment between government, business, and society. So in 2026, we don't need perfect certainty, but we do need a credible direction, and we need delivery. So in the run up to Sona, let's see what the moment presents, and after after the 12th, I'll do a brief reflection on what we wanted to see versus what we saw. Thank you for listening.